Trade is one of those words that sounds clean in theory, but gets real messy in practice. We're told it connects nations, drops prices, spreads wealth, and somehow keeps everyone chill. It's a nice story, but history kinda smirks at it and says, not so fast. The idea is simple. People swap what they got for what they need and boom, everyone levels up. Sounds smooth, almost too perfect, like a system that runs itself without drama. But the truth is, it never really played out that clean in the real world. Trade was never just about friendly exchange. It was shaped by power from day one. Behind every open market was something heavier, like warships, governments, or big money networks pulling strings. Freedom in trade usually meant freedom for whoever was already strong enough to set the rules. Markets moved, goods crossed oceans, and yeah, people made crazy money. Cities grew, industries exploded, and the world changed fast. But behind all that glow-up was control, pressure, and systems built to favor the top dogs. Trade never floated above politics. It followed power like a shadow. First comes control, then comes the theory to justify it. That's important because for years, people were sold the opposite story. We were told trade became neutral, frictionless, almost natural like gravity. Goods go where they're cheapest, everyone wins, countries specialize, life gets better. And when things broke, like factories shutting down or countries becoming dependent, it was brushed off as just efficiency. But let's be real, nothing about a system backed by sanctions, warships, and financial pressure is neutral. That's not some peaceful marketplace, that's controlled chaos with branding. The surface looked elegant, but underneath it was all muscle. Before economists made it sound smart, rulers already knew what trade really meant. Trade meant money, money meant power, and power meant survival. It wasn't about fairness, it was about winning. Back in the early modern world, trade wasn't seen as cooperation, it was competition. Whoever controlled routes, ports, and resources got ahead faster than everyone else. It was basically a global power game, not a friendly exchange program. This was the era of mercantilism. Running from the 1500s to the 1700s, nations didn't think in terms of shared gains, they thought in terms of who's winning and who's losing. Exports were gold, imports were risky, and everything was about stacking advantage. Colonies weren't partners, they were tools. They supplied raw materials and were forced to buy finished goods from the empire. Monopoly rights weren't about fairness, they were about control and profit. When you look at it like that, the first wave of globalization hits different. It wasn't some peaceful rise of trade, it was engineered domination. Systems were built to extract, exclude, and lock in advantage. Spain pulled insane amounts of silver from the Americas, feeding global money flows. Portugal flexed naval power to dominate spice routes. The Dutch built a mega-trade empire through a company that could literally wage war. Then came the British East India Company, basically a government in disguise. It ruled land, controlled trade, and shaped entire economies. If you were on the losing side, it didn't matter if it was a company or a country, the pressure felt the same. England's Navigation Acts made things even clearer. Trade had to run through English ships and systems, keeping wealth inside the empire. That wasn't free trade, that was controlled flow with enforcement. Colonies got locked into roles they couldn't easily escape. Raw materials went out, finished goods came back in. It was a system designed to keep dependency profitable for the center and painful for everyone else. This is the part most people skip when talking about trade. Global networks didn't grow from kindness, they grew from control. Power organized the system, and profit followed. And yeah, it created massive wealth. Cities like London and Amsterdam blew up economically. Finance evolved fast because trade was too valuable to mess up. Insurance, stock markets, joint companies, all that grew because trade needed protection and structure. Ships needed insurance, insurance needed capital, capital needed laws. Before long, trade wasn't just exchange, it was an entire power system. Trade wasn't about swapping goods anymore. It was about securing profit at scale. And systems like that are never neutral. They're built with intention, shaped by whoever holds power. Then comes the twist in the story. Britain starts calling itself the champion of free trade. Sounds like a big shift, but timing matters. By the 1800s, Britain was already on top. It had industrial dominance, control over shipping routes, and a strong financial system. London was basically the heartbeat of global money. From that position, Britain started pushing openness. The repeal of the Corn Laws became a big symbolic moment. It looked like a move toward fairness and smarter economics. But here's the catch: Britain didn't go free trade while climbing up. It did it after it had already won the game. Once you're on top, openness isn't risky, it's strategic. Cheaper food helped workers, lower costs boosted industry, and open markets meant more buyers. Everything aligned with Britain's advantage. So yeah, free trade made sense. For Britain. That's the real game. Free trade didn't create British dominance made free trade useful. When you're already producing better goods, opening markets helps you dominate more. When you control shipping and finance, more trade strengthens your system. When your currency is trusted, global trade locks others into your network. So free trade becomes a tool, not a principle. It's self-interest dressed up as universal logic. And honestly, it's a pretty slick move. History loves powers that can turn advantage into ideology. Britain pulled that off clean. But when someone pushed back, the mask slipped. Take the Opium Wars with China. Britain had a trade imbalance and didn't like it. Instead of adjusting, it pushed opium into China to flip the flow. When China resisted, Britain rolled in with military force. That's free trade backed by gunboats. Not exactly the peaceful exchange we're taught. It's one of those moments where the hypocrisy is loud. Forcing a harmful product into a country, then defending it as trade rights. That's not economics. That's power flexing hard. By the late 1800s, the global system looked advanced and connected. Telegraphs sped up communication, steamships moved goods faster, and money flowed across borders. It felt modern, almost like today. But the system had a clear hierarchy. Britain secured routes, controlled finance, and shaped the rules. Power wasn't gone, it just became normal. And when power becomes invisible, people stop questioning it. That's when the myth of free trade really sticks. Not because it's true, but because it feels natural. Then the balance started shifting, and a new player stepped into the spotlight. The United States didn't rise by blindly following free trade, it played the game smart. Early on, it actually protected its own industries instead of exposing them to stronger economies. Think about it like this. If you throw a beginner into a match with pros, they're getting crushed instantly. That's exactly how global trade works when a weak economy opens up too fast. So the US slowed things down and built strength first. Back in 1791, Alexander Hamilton already laid out the plan clearly. He argued that America needed its own industries if it wanted real independence. Relying on imports wasn't a strategy, it was a weakness waiting to get exploited. This became known as the infant industry idea. Basically, protect your industries while they're small so they can grow strong enough to compete later. It wasn't about avoiding competition, it was about timing it right. And that's exactly what the US did throughout the 1800s. Tariffs weren't small policies, they were a core part of the system. Foreign goods were kept expensive so local industries could breathe and expand. After the Civil War, this approach went even harder. Railroads expanded, factories popped up everywhere, and steel production went crazy. The country transformed into an industrial powerhouse behind those protective walls. This wasn't some pure free market miracle. It was a mix of protection, state support, expansion, and a massive internal market. Basically, the US built its strength first before playing the global game. So later, when powerful nations started preaching free trade, the story got a little fake. They acted like they discovered some universal truth, but in reality, they used strategy first, then switched to principles once they were winning. And this pattern shows up again and again. Rising countries talk strategy, dominant countries talk ideology. Same game, just different language. That doesn't mean trade is useless or fake. There are real benefits, bigger markets, lower costs, more innovation. People do gain from it, no doubt. But the clean textbook version is kinda misleading. It assumes equal players and fair rules. In reality, the system is uneven from the start. Power differences shape everything. Some countries have leverage, others don't. Some set rules, others follow them. Trade can build wealth, but it can also trap countries in weak positions. It can grow industries or wipe them out completely. It all depends on where you stand in the system. And this is where things get risky. When people believe trade is naturally fair and self-correcting, they stop asking questions. They stop looking at who actually controls the system. Questions like who controls shipping routes, who owns the banks, who sets standards, who can sanction others and who can't. These aren't small details, they're the real game. By 1945, the United States wasn't just another economy. It was the center of global power after World War II. It had the factories, the gold, the military, and the influence. A new system was built from that position. The dollar became central, global trade expanded, and institutions were created to support it. On the surface, it looked more open and fair than older empires. And in some ways it was. Trade grew fast, economies recovered, and people saw real improvements in living standards. The world became more connected than ever. But again, it wasn't floating freely in space. It was backed by American power, just like earlier systems were backed by British power. Different leader, same structure. The dollar didn't become dominant by accident. It became dominant because the US had the strength to support it. Military, financial, and political power all worked together. Trade worked smoothly because there was order behind it. Shipping lanes were protected, contracts were enforced, and payments were trusted. That stability didn't just appear, it was maintained. And that's something people often miss. They focus on tariffs and prices, but ignore the foundation underneath. Without power, the system doesn't hold. What looks like global efficiency is often just power doing its job quietly. And once you see that, the whole idea of free trade starts to feel a bit different. Once you see the structure behind global trade, a lot of modern history starts making more sense. The massive expansion of trade in the late 20th century wasn't just smart economics winning, it was a system scaling up under a clear power center. Some countries sat in the core while others were plugged in on terms they didn't fully control. Nations were told to specialize based on comparative advantage, which sounds clean but hides a deeper risk. Specialize in what exactly and under whose system? Because if you're exporting cheap raw materials and importing expensive finished goods, you're not exactly winning. That's how dependency quietly forms. You rely on others for critical goods, technology, even currency, and the more you rely, the less control you actually have. For consumers, trade often feels great because prices drop and choices increase. For investors and big corporations, it opens doors to bigger profits and cheaper labor. But for workers tied to specific industries or regions, it can hit hard. Factories don't close because work disappears, they close because it moves somewhere cheaper. Entire communities lose their economic base and get told it's just efficiency. It's a polished word for a rough reality. Countries face the same issue on a larger scale. Open too early without strong industries, and local businesses get crushed. What's called modernization can sometimes just mean replacement. Latin America shows this pattern pretty clearly. Many countries became stuck exporting commodities while importing high-value goods. Over time, that creates vulnerability, debt pressure, and slow industrial growth. The issue wasn't trade itself, it was the position within the system. Starting weak and staying locked in that role makes growth harder. It turns trade into a cycle instead of a ladder. And this is where the myth becomes dangerous. If people believe trade is always fair and self-balancing, they stop questioning outcomes. They stop asking who benefits and who pays the price. Because trade isn't just about goods moving around. It's about power, structure, and control. Who owns the routes, who controls finance, who sets the rules, all of that matters more than theory. Some countries issue the currency everyone depends on. Others have to borrow it just to function. That alone creates a huge imbalance. Some can impose sanctions. Others can only absorb them. Some can protect their industries, others are pressured to open up. It's not a level playing field, never has been. So yeah, trade can create growth, innovation, and connection, but it can also create dependence, inequality, and instability. Both things can exist at the same time. The real takeaway isn't that trade is bad. It's that trade is never neutral. It reflects the world as it is, not as it's described in textbooks. At the end of the day, free trade has always been a bit of a story. A useful one, a powerful one, but still a story shaped by those on top. And if you really want to understand how the system works, you don't just follow the goods. You follow the power behind them.